what's interesting about the rejection types is the dynamic can't get started with a wound, because to admit that the wound is there would be to admit that this part of you still exists. And the rejection type can't do that. Part of the way you reject something is by affirming its opposite. You can sort of think of the object relations as almost like a blueprint for how relationships need to be set up in adulthood in order for our personality and self-concept to be reaffirmed.
The Big Hormone Enneagram.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres 4-5 link, 4-5-8 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9-1, 9-7-4 trifix.
What up, it's Emeka. I'm an 8-7, sexual self-pres with 8-5-4 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4 with a 3-6-9 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Big Hormone Enneagram. Courtney's with us today to talk about rejection. She's here to share with us her insights and to work her usual magic. This is the Courtney rejection episode. We went for a while, so we're going to split it up into two. But first, let's go over our plugs. Buy John's book, The Instinctual Drives in the Enneagram. If you've been listening to this podcast and you have not bought his book, shame on you. The instincts are a very pivotal aspect of the Enneagram and understanding your type, and integrating your blind spot is the path of self-growth within the Enneagram. So no other book explores the instincts in as much detail and nuance as John does. And so pick up your copy at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and leave a review as well. Secondly, David has a Trifix booklet available at Enneagrammer.com. We talk about Trifix a lot on here, and although it's an advanced topic, it's something that can provide a lot of nuance, and there's not a lot of useful content around Trifix. And David's book is a visual, archetypal, impressionistic exploration of the different Trifixes, and you can check it out at the Enneagrammer.com store. DAA, Dark Arts Academy. We have recently typed Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain, and we've also been doing videos exploring more topical subjects. Recently, we've did videos exploring type 9 wings, type 6 wings. We've been talking about certain questions and FAQs that come up around typing recently that you'll see more of. Once again, with DAA, we're exploring typing as an experiential reality of these types, that these types are real and they are observable in real time. And so we're learning how to see and hear with the instruments of the Enneagram. These concepts that we're learning how they can be applied in real time, and we can know what a 6 is, or what a head type is, or what a rejection type is, or what an attachment type is, and how that shows up in real time. And so we are developing language around typing so that typing doesn't just remain such an esoteric, mysterious thing that only a couple people know how to do, but a lot more people have language and distinctions that are very clear and usable, that they can make distinctions as to what a type is and what it isn't. And also, if you are somebody who's looking for clarity in your own self-typing, I mean, you can do this on your own, but typing is a very pivotal point in everyone's Enneagram journey, whether you try to figure out on your own, which plenty of people have, because the more you have access to accurate information, the more you can probably land on your core type. But you can save yourself a lot of time by having experts like us who have a lot of experience, who can give you a perspective, an objective perspective, unbiased perspective as to what your type might be. So you can find out more about our typing services at Enneagrammer.com/get typed. All right, this is the Courtney rejection episode where we reject Courtney nonstop for 1 hour and a half.
I am so
welcome, Courtney.
I was thinking of naming this episode something like Emma reckons with rejection.
Who? I'm already reckoning.
No, but
I feel like
Courtney's,
you are, right?
But you've got some new bombs to drop on Emeka.
It's got to be the Courtney rejection episode.
No, I know, I agree. But you are the person who's, in the same way that the attachment types have spent the last year kind of reeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're the stand-in for that.
You don't think I'm reeling enough?
You're going to rip the Band-Aid off Emeka.
She doesn't think I'm suffering enough. She just wants me to suffer even more.
I think that what happened to the attachment types for the last year is coming for all of you. So.
I can't disagree. This is going to be the fourth rejection episode. So we're going hard in the paint on rejection. So I'm all here for it.
Okay.
I can handle it.
In the paint.
Peanut gallery over here is
yeah, what's that
rejection's gonna get it, haha. And then I'm like, come over here and talk. And she's like, no, I'm gonna sit over here.
I'm just gonna judge from over in the corner.
Under her blankie.
At least we're easy to pick apart. It took us like damn near 6 months to even get a clear look at what the fuck attachment was up to. Look at how quick it's been for rejection. That's right. Superior.
Just a little more obvious.
A little more obnoxious.
Just a little bit.
A little more on the nose.
Yeah, what has been opening up Emeka in turn, or like blowing your mind or changing your perspective? Or is it just this, is it like stuff you already knew but it's hitting you on a deeper level, or?
Oh, this is new stuff. I mean, the object relations call was kind of like, oh shit, a big one, but this is just seeing how insidious this is, and even more disturbing in that, like, what I'm really turned on by is the thing that's actually keeping me separate from, like, what I'm really turned on by is actually maintaining a cutoffness that I assume that what my personhood is or is limited to. So that's kind of been like a really hard thing to come to terms with, that I'm unconsciously invested in remaining this way. And also just catching in the way that I think I was talking to when we were setting up her mic, just talking about her experiences with rejection types and all the ways that I think I said something that I won't say yes to something that I'm not also prepared to say no to. Which, if you sit and think about that, there is kind of a way that I'm always looking to maintain unconsciously a state of being cut off from something, or a state of easily defaulting to being cut off. And so there's a way that I've been seeing how there's just a reflexive wall permeating everything that I'm doing, even things that I haven't even considered. We're starting off from, this stays away from me, and then maybe we'll consider it. And even as I'm considering it, it's with the assumption that soon we will default to being separate from. I don't know. It's just, just coming to terms with like how much even my approach, all the rejection types are kind of setting themselves up to have that as a default, like, even if I approach someone or something, I'm setting it up in a way that it can't be reciprocated. And I'm seeing how 2s and 5s are doing the same thing.
I want to, at some point, like, back up and kind of provide context. But one of the things that Emeka and I were talking about is, I'm going to sort of talk about the zone where rejection gets activated for rejection types. And I want to explain the context for that. But my perspective is that you can feel rejection types almost kind of what I would call like pre-rejection, like sort of setting the dynamic up so that it's not going to work. And they're going to be able to have a story about why it's not going to work on their terms.
Yeah.
And so you can feel the 8 kind of going really big, or like, I've got all kinds of funny stories where like, this shit's just not going to work for me. Like, this is not what I want. And they like have already set up the dynamic so that then if the person pushes away, the 8 can say, I didn't want this. Like, this person wasn't right for me.
Yeah.
And the 5, you can sometimes feel that, like when there's that first opening that the 5 does sometimes, they go to like the darkest shit Like they don't just like start, they don't like inch their way into it. It like goes way so far way deep that now then people are like, I can't handle, like it's too much all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the 5's like, yeah, these people can't handle me. Like they can't handle the darkness. And I feel like the 2 in the level of sort of neediness they expect from other people, it's sort of set up, well, this person wasn't ready for my help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that big time.
And so for me, this is a pre-rejection frame of like setting up the terms so that then when the person walks away, it's not them rejecting the 8, 5, or 2. It's that they weren't ready for the 8, 5, or 2.
Yeah. Sort of like blowing this person out of the water that they're not able to reciprocate, which guarantees that it doesn't happen, that the connection doesn't happen. Either they say yes to it and it becomes a possession dynamic, but like the person can't reciprocate. The person cannot give back what the push that you gave them. It reinforces this possession dynamic that we were talking about. So just seeing that and sort of catching myself doing that and seeing all the different ways I've been approaching things that way, it's like, ew. That's what it feels like. It just feels gross.
And so do you find yourself relaxing around some of the rejection stuff, or like considering at least considering like other ways of being like a little bit more contact instead of it just being this total shutdown?
Right now I'm just seeing how reflexive it is, because even though I'm just becoming aware of it, it's just like a reflex, a knee-jerk reaction that I'm able to notice now. It's like just how fast I can reflexively throw up those walls when someone is trying to engage with me in a way that doesn't fit my idea of what I think engagement is. And I guess just seeing how inflexible I am, because it's kind of like I've already predetermined what engagement's going to be. Like, why? There's certain things, I guess I'm saying, this is where my personality sees that I'm most impactful, or what I see is most impactful. If you want an engagement thing outside of that, it feels like no, but it's sort of deciding ahead of time what optimal engagement is, which isn't engagement at all.
So I have been giving some thought to this, and I had a couple core ideas that came to me as I was thinking. I've been thinking about you guys a lot, like you 8, 5s, and 2s.
Wow. We're in your thoughts.
You've been feeling tender toward us, perhaps? I think it's part of your growth work, Emeka, to let it out there.
Receive the blessing.
Oh, God. I did not expect that.
And some of it is, I think, setting it up almost like just reminding people about object relations in the first place. Because the idea is, right, that all of us as we come into this world, the kind of 2 core functions our parents need to provide for us is what we call the nurturing or maternal function, which is all around being held, being mirrored, being nurtured, being unconditionally loved. And then what we called the paternal or protective function, which is about being supported and being instilled with confidence and a feeling of resourcefulness as I make my way independently through the world. And these are the 2 main, from an egoic perspective, sort of the 2 pillars of what families, parents, and caregivers provide egos, people, in order for us to move through the world as adults in a secure, intact way. No parent does this perfectly. And part of what sets up the Enneagram type is not the fact that the parent didn't do right by me in a certain area. It is the truth is that parents are failing on both of these fronts all the time, by definition. And the question of type then arises, when a parent failed to meet me in this way, in either of these realms or both of these realms, which of those kind of stuck to me and became a part of my identification of self, became part of my story or narrative around what makes me me, and what was my response to that? And we talked about frustration, rejection, and attachment as the 3 possible responses. So the reason this is important is you can sort of think of the object relations as almost like a blueprint for how relationships need to be set up in adulthood in order for our personality and self-concept to be reaffirmed. And so what ends up happening is I'm not able to see the other person clearly because I'm going to be attracted to people who allow me to play this dynamic out again and again and again. I'm going to train them to act a certain way so that this dynamic can occur again and again and again. And I'm going to be filtering reality so that the only parts of their behavior that I remember are going to be the behaviors that fit this blueprint that I learned as an early in childhood. And so relationships are really sort of like crumbling under the weight of relationships being used not for connection and love and all these other things that we think relationships are here for, but really we use them to restore a sense of self at the detriment of real connection. And that's why we talk about object relations is what am I doing to relationships that's actually getting in the way of what I really want to accomplish with them. And so why this matters for the rejection type in particular is when you think about the frustration and the attachment types, the frustration type, the whole dynamic needs to begin with a re-feeling of the wound, a remembering of you're not meeting me in this way. Either you're not seeing me or you're not supporting me or both. And I need to feel that failure on your part in real time in my current relationships so that I can feel frustrated and say, you're not doing it. You're failing to meet my needs. You're failing to do what I want you to do. I have to go do this myself now again. But the dynamic is going to begin with an articulation or a recognition that in some way there's something I'm expecting or wanting from you that you're failing to provide. Similarly, with the attachment types, and this is what attachment to disconnect is all about, is it also begins with a wound, which is you're not meeting me in this way. You're either not seeing and loving me or you're not supporting and guiding me. But I think there's something I can do to make you do that. And so then I begin to adapt and focus my behavior on how you weren't providing it in this circumstance, but here I feel like a fleetingness that you're going to, you're about to, you just did, and it must be because I adjusted myself in some way. But again, the dynamic is going to begin with you're not meeting me. What is different about the rejection types is, remember, the rejection strategy is when that wound occurred, it's to cut off the idea that that part of me even mattered or existed. And so I think what's interesting about the rejection types is the dynamic can't get started with a wound, because to admit that the wound is there would be to admit that this part of you still exists. And the rejection type can't do that. And so what ends up happening as I've started thinking about this is it's almost like a bigger filter of what's getting anywhere close to this zone of where I might get hurt again in this way, but I've got to get ahead of it because I've got to kind of proactively stop it and shut it down.
And that's also pre-rejection.
Right. Because the wound itself does not, we've already agreed that that's not possible, that I'm not going to allow that to happen. And so if we get anywhere, and my sense of self is predicated upon the fact that I don't have sensitivity in this area. Mm-hmm. And so if you get anywhere close to this or ask me to expand in any way into this area, I'm going to immediately shut it down. And so I think that there's an automaticity to frustration and attachment and rejection that's true for all of them. But I am curious whether the rejection scope almost has to be bigger because it's kind of proactively getting out ahead of anything that could be hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed. If something truly upsets me or hurts me, I notice that one of the reoccurring tracks that are running in my mind is that's not happening again. Like, it's either I've done something to make sure it doesn't happen again, or if it happens again, I'm not going to care. Like, me getting that upset can't happen again. And so you can imagine if there's a reoccurring problem or a relationship where the other person feels the need to revisit certain problems to feel connected, how that can basically shut them out, because I'm never going to allow myself to get upset about the same thing in the same way or with the same intensity more than once, because that my whole type structure is built on that's not going to happen again.
Courtney, you use the term like the scope needs to be bigger,
Filter.
something like that.
Yeah, the what triggers the rejection response, it has to be like almost like a wider lens, kind of bigger than the wound itself. So it's like anything that gets like anywhere close to the realm of, even before you hurt me, if you even get into the realm of sort of nurturing or love or gooiness, I have to shut it down before the wound even has a chance to resurface. So the behavior I'm monitoring and looking for that triggers the rejection response, it's almost like a wider aperture, because I'm needing to be vigilant on what is going to trigger me feeling the activation of this wound that my self-concept is built around never feeling.
This I think is, in previous things, Emeka has talked about the bargain or the
negotiation or something.
Yeah, the negotiation. There's like a role that we're both playing, and my feeling of being in relationships with rejection types is seeing, I like having kind of like a sense that relationships are like slowly like a building of, I guess, like trust, intimacy, and stuff like this. But then I'll feel the rejection type being like, no, you go back here. No, back here. Like,
yeah, you did this. Now you go back.
Now you're back here, and having been a student of a rejection type in a training program, you would kind of become her peer, and then it'd be like, nope, you're back here. Like trying to find a new way to put you back in this thing. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
And I think the other thing is, part of the way you reject something is by affirming its opposite.
So how does that look?
Well, you can really see it. I mean, you can see it all three of them. So part of the, the leaning of the 8 into transaction, getting shit done in the world, being an independent, feeling good about being an independent body who knows how to negotiate this world very successfully. Part of the reason that the 8 is leaning into that is it is implicitly a rejection of its opposite, which is the merging or the feeling of like, this is not about me making my way through the world. It's about me connecting to another person and feeling like a heart connection. And so that's because we can't ever say I've been hurt. Like that's part of the structure of what we all agreed. Like the rejection types have made this big sacrifice of I'm limiting my definition of my humanity so that we don't have to talk about how I've been hurt and how you've hurt me.
Couldn't part of the opposite in the context of 8 also be the 5 piece, which is that I don't have enough personal resources and I'm not big enough to be in the world or something like that? Does that make any sense to draw that line?
Well, I have another theory.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this. So anyway, so you see that, and you see that clearly in the opposite of the 2, right? I go into sort of merging and caring for other people, and in doing that, I'm negating my independence and autonomy. Like I don't even have and that's why it's kind of it's got a kind of a creepy quality to it, because it's actually it's preloaded with not actually doing it for connection or doing it for independent functioning. It's doing it to stand for I don't do the opposite. So it's already got an ulterior motive baked into the activity, which is, it's not that I'm really into this. It's like, this is the way I declare who I am not.
Yeah. Yeah, that hits hard. Like, so the 8 is negotiating so that we can't say that I'm here because I'm here for you or you're here for me. It's like, I'm not going to bet on the goodness of your heart.
Right.
Because if I do and you burn me, that's really going to hurt. So I'm just going to negotiate. It's going to be a negotiation because to bet on your heart is risking a lot.
I was telling Emeka that I have an 8 friend who was looking for a house, and she found this house that, she was just like in love with this house. She's like, oh my God, this is the perfect house. Like, this is just, it's going to be amazing. I can like totally see myself here. It's going to be awesome. And then I expected her to say, so like I talked to the owner and I talked to them about like how much it was going to mean to me. And like and she was like, so I made him my last offer and I said, this is it. Like, you take it or leave it.
Oh,
good
God.
job.
It was amazing. It was, and she didn't get the house.
I'm surprised.
And I have another 8 friend. This is actually pretty moving, where it was a man who had done like a ton of work, and it was like a big group, and we were all kind of like acknowledging and thanking him. And his father was there, and he's an 8. And everyone was going around the room sort of thanking this person for all the work that they had done. And when the dad stood up to do his part, he started ragging on his son.
Not surprising, actually.
And so then a female 8 went over to his son, and the dad said something. And then she said, I'm going to translate what the 8 is saying. He's actually saying you've touched his heart. He cannot say that.
Right.
And it's exactly what I'm talking about,
right?
Like, I felt the sensitivity here. That is not who I am. And so I lean into the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To make sure that never becomes part of.
Ooh, that was I saw the body language in that one.
Yeah, that's close to home right there. That's a lot.
Yeah. And what's that 2's name? Nicholas? Is that his name?
Yeah,
Nicholas. Yeah.
Nicholas. And you heard him like sort of talking about being at parties where he just is basically silent, right? Like, and you're at a party, you're showing, who are you? What's this person? And then it's like but then like the moment there's an opportunity to talk about what a giver I am or how helpful I can be, I go hard into that. And like, that's the only way I know how to show up at a party, which is to show you from the very beginning, even as it feels like we're here sort of all with our independent agendas, that's not what I'm about. And the setting is set up to feel that that's what this is for. And I can feel that in the dynamic of the party, and I react to it. I feel the request on everyone else to sort of define who I am as an independent person, and I reject and go into being super helpful.
Yeah.
And I think the 5, it's about being a human being altogether.
Which is almost like you start talking to a 5 and all of a sudden you realize that it feels like there isn't a person on the other end because they've just started talking about something completely unrelated to whatever it is, and you feel alienated in the moment.
It's like in Jesse's video where it's like, here's an intellectual object. We're going to do this, and that's what we're going to focus on.
Right. Not me that's here.
Yeah,
it's something that unrelated that you maybe approximate contact with the person that might be me.
I have a friend who's a 5 who had been running a business for a long time that was like bordering on insolvency. And he was constantly having to raise money, but it was always like unclear if it was ever going to make it. And he did this for many years. And I said something to him like, wow, that must be really hard. it was like I could not have said a worse thing. Like the idea that that I would relate to the emotional difficulty of having a business that's borderline bankrupt for many, many years and having to put on a good face of it's going to make it. Like that's not the way he wanted. And he just immediately leaped into the mechanics of how the structuring of the agreements was going to work. And, this is like the way the computer program was going to work. That was part of the deal. And like, blah, 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 blah. And there was like this blankness on his face where I saw, oh my, I could not have asked him. I mean, he was horrified that I understood the issue in that way and was asking him to speak to the issue in that way.
Wow. It's almost like you're asking him to exist as a person who has feelings about something that's happening in the world, and it has to kind of zoom back out into the abstract. Like, I'm not here. There's no person here going through anything.
And the merest invitation to go to that space, it's not just it has to be like, I mean, there is that flat wall that we've talked about, but it's also I have to lean into the opposite to really distance myself from this. And the stuff around the 8 around, like they like vulnerable people, they like, like all that stuff that you guys have sort of picked apart. I think that's way overblown. But what I do think is true is, part of this object relations stuff is, I define self by not being the other.
Right.
And so I think there is something about 8s needing vulnerability and heartfulness in their relationships, not because it triggers their own heart necessarily, but because it becomes yet another way to identify that's not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
It's again
It's
that
like-
thing I've been bringing up where we get into it's a relationship of opposites, and so it's a negotiation kind of. You're going to be the emotional, heartfelt person, and I'm going to be the rejection cutoff.
It makes it easier to remain
Yeah,
the rejection cutoff
Keep the
person
pattern.
because
Yeah.
the other person is obviously embodying the thing that you're trying to push away from. So it makes it easier to just double down, which is a weird thing to realize because it's like, that's why you're attracted to that person. You're attracted to them because they will allow you to reinforce what you're already reinforcing.
You know what I mean? This is how everybody's relationships are, like
totally.
these, as you're speaking to at the beginning, Courtney, just like self-reinforcing mechanisms. And everybody's self is also already pretty miserable. And so it's like just the world of perpetuating misery of just, under the disguise of something like connection or love or something like that. It's like, it's interesting to me, kind of like negotiating the smoke and mirrors of just like the narratives that we have about like how to be a person and what people are doing like in relationships, or like what people say they want, and the images that you're fed of like just relationships or something like that, and just, I don't know, seeing how nobody's actually, like, everybody's like playing a simulation all the time. And it's really interesting because even though it's all simulation, you're even trying to like locate what part of the simulation do they think they're at least playing. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so, everybody's behavior is so many levels abstracted from even what they think they're doing, which that self is this game we're talking about of this self-reinforcing mechanism. And so it's just like layers and layers and layers of it's like fucked up sonar or something like that. And so anyway, it's just interesting because, I mean, we're talking about just like 3 object relational affects that everybody has. Like, this is what defines everybody. And I mean, you're either frustrated, you're attached to disconnect, or you're just cutting shit off. It's like,
right.
God.
What a wonderful world.
Yeah.
Well, and you can see why then it gets set up and perpetuated, because those are the people that are parenting us, right? And so that's what they're bringing. So that's, of course, why it's imperfect. And it just keeps going and going. And I think that's why also I was just saying I think this has been the process for many attachment types over the last year who've been listening to the podcast, is just this kind of mind-blowing, I thought I understood attachment, but I thought I knew what I was up to. No, I didn't. You know, I didn't see it at this level. I didn't see it at this level. And also the level of regret and remorse over we're all doing it to one another, but we are putting this, all of us are putting this on people we care about.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the part that is the gut punch or the heartbreak, is seeing just the papered layers we bring. This, it's like almost like a paper mache of like layer upon layer upon layer of, newspaper that we're bringing with glue and sticky water to a relationship, and how human that is, but also sad and horrifying it is.
I was just thinking about sort of like how, 8 defaulting to the negotiation and how that shows up in attraction for me. It's almost like that mindset is also permeating my approach, because the thing that would hurt is that, she really liked me for me, not for anything I was bringing. And if it doesn't work out, then it's like, well, she didn't, my personality failed, or who I am was rejected. So as long as I keep it within the realm of, I'm doing this for her, or I'm activating her, I wasn't interesting enough, or sex wasn't good enough. Like, as long as it's this thing, external thing that I can manipulate or orchestrate, then it keeps it away from me. And so that whole experience that we reference about the soul intercourse is like, it's me that can. But that's the thing that's risky, is that if I'm looking at attraction on the basis of me, then what else could be more of an ultimate rejection? It's like, it's not about, because I'm always in my mind catching myself default into, what do I need to do to make this better, or to make this more of what I want, versus when it's just on a level of being or who you are, then it's like, well, she doesn't like me. That hurts a lot more.
How capable, Emeka, are you as a rejection type to hold the sense of you that isn't just the things that you're providing? Or is it kind of like almost like a Russian doll of, I can keep moving backwards and backwards and backwards and saying that that's just the thing I'm offering, and that's the thing I'm offering?
Well, it feels like I'm better at being able to hold the idea of just me as without necessarily what I'm doing. The closer I am to you, the more I see our relationship. I don't see my relationship to you guys necessarily on the basis of what I'm doing for you guys. Like, it's, but there is the backdrop or the operating system of my personhood is like, but I am a functioning piece to something, and I am necessary towards something, and that's a factor. And so it feels like a part that can never really go away. It's always threatening to overtake any dynamic, is to think about it in those terms, is, well, you could have done more of this, and that would have, that's always there. But to the degree that I can see someone else's real personhood, and maybe the connection happened not because of anything I did, we just connected. That's when it's really getting to, closer to my heart. Like, but there's always a part of me that's always like, but you play a role. Like, there's some kind of special role that, this person is depending on you for. Like, my mind ends up framing things in terms of, but you are play a specific role in this person's life. That's why they like, that it's just insidious. It's always there. I can always reframe any dynamic or anything if I want to in those terms. Like, oh, I'm there's no one else in his life like this or something like that, that kind of.
I think one of the things that happens as I was reflecting on this is, and I think this speaks to this feeling of separateness that you've been talking about, is I think all of the rejection types are aware that they're not as full a person as they could be. And so there is entering into a relationship a feeling of deficiency, because all of the rejection types are at some level aware, or at least, other people have not cut this part off of themselves. And I'm trying to be in relationship with someone who seems to have a definition of self that's fuller than mine. And now how do I meet them, given that I've tied one arm behind my back?
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I think this feeling of separation is really the consequence of, I really still want to feel like a human, but it's like the choices I've made about how to define myself are never going to let me do that. Yeah. And I feel that at some level. And that is the origin of the separation.
One thing that I've repeated before to exes in the past at the beginning of a relationship is, I need you to let me know what people do in relationships that you expect me to do, because I don't know. Like, it's his real genuine request, because I don't know what you're expecting from me that you expect from people, because there's a good chance I'm not going to do it. If you tell me what it is, I'll just do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it, that's what's like ironic about it is, especially for the 8, we sort of talked about the rejection types having the least amount of hope, but actually this is the hopefulness, because you continue to be in relationship at all.
Yeah, right. Oh man.
And so I think there is hope there.
I mean, you would think.
Yeah, and as a rejection type, what is the personality store? Like why do you go into relationships?
I mean, that's the only way that I'm gonna get. It's like, I still want contact. I still want a semblance of contact, but it's like, because I've limited myself to this one side of humanity or being a person, the only way that I can feel a semblance of contact is, let me occupy this, super necessary part of this other person. Them needing me now becomes my replacement for what contact means. And then the hope is, like, maybe if that dynamic can lead to something that's more, maybe they can end up penetrating me in some way, and we can have like a two-way thing. That's it's sort of, this is the gateway to what a connection that might a real connection. But initially, this is the only way it can start. This is the only way that I can actually feel contact. I do want contact because I'm feeling cut off from people, but this is really the only way it can happen. And then you hope that it actually becomes something more of a real connection.
Because this narrow aperture of like finding a way that, like, if I do this, then maybe kind of, I mean, it reminds me of our parents.
Yeah.
As both having rejection type parents, and like, yeah, sometimes our families are both pretty big. I think you have three other siblings.
Three other siblings, yeah. Three
yes,
sisters.
we have like the same size family, and so when I'm around my family, I'm like, I'm the oldest, and I'm like, why the fuck did they reproduce this much? Like,
yeah,
seems like they didn't even want one of them.
Right.
and it's like, I get that. Like, I think my youngest sister, there's like a gap between my brother, my sister, and my youngest sister, and part of my suspicion is, my mom was threatened with no longer being like mommy and it needed an accident to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did she do that? Because she seemed like, it's like, does she even like being a parent? But I think there's this thing of like, this is my human role.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll reach me somehow. And I've always been kind of that's the, like, when I hear about stories about your parents, it's a kind of I get a similar feeling.
Yeah. And to the interesting thing about my family, my youngest sister has Down syndrome, which you could see as a tragic thing. But now looking at it, because she's 6 years younger than me, so she's probably 32. So, but she's still a kid, essentially, which means my parents now still have an excuse to care for someone. So they have remained in perpetual parent state. And I've thought to myself, because the rest of us grew up and left the house, they still get to be parents together and take care of my little sister. And I've thought if they didn't have her, they'd be at each other's throats. Like they didn't have this mutual person who's always vulnerable and needs to be taken care of. So they have a rejection, sort of possession dynamic. And so they just constantly dote on her and give her snacks and all this stuff. And so I'm just seeing like how it gives my little sister gives them almost a sense of this is a reason to live. This is someone who still cares about me because all the other kids don't, because we're old enough to not like them. And this is someone who's constantly receiving and wanting my care, and still like she's stuck in that kid state. So it's kind of like a gift to them as rejection types.
I do think that both of you are speaking to, why do we want to be in relationship? And it is this tangle of connection and love, but then the object relation kind of coming in and distorting it very quickly. And so the personality is going to say, I want to be in relationship because that's how I know who I am.
Yeah.
And yet that definition of self, did occur in a container of love for most human beings, even though it was delivered imperfectly. And, that definition of self is sitting very close to the initial feeling of love. And so they are kind of interwoven, and, sort of the essential state is locked up in the object relation dynamic.
Yeah, to your point, my pattern over the years had been that I would stay out of relationships for a long time, years, and then I would get really thirsty for a relationship. I'd get in one and it wouldn't be a good one, and maybe it'd come to an end and I'd go back to be like, oh, I don't, And so there can be a pattern with, I could see with rejection types where, like loneliness is this kind of a gross word, but there is some tension there. I remember that came up in Jesse's interview with Josh, and it's kind of like a thing that you don't want to actually look at because it's kind of the baseline. Like
baseline of rejection, or
yes, like that's the baseline, is the assumption that I'm not connected. And there's all these unconscious ways that you're maintaining a cutoffness from everyone. And so that word loneliness is kind of like a ill, because it's always there. Even when you're with, I've spoken to this, just being really close to someone and that feeling that I'm not even in the room, that I'm watching somebody else be close to someone. That's the rejection structure, like saying, hey, you're being loved.
Yeah.
Fuck that. Like, that's not supposed to happen. You're going to get, just having an out-of-body experience. That's fucking... So the baseline is aloneness on some level, and that's a weird thing to say or even to admit, because it's like it's always staring at you.
Well, and the aloneness is not supposed to hurt, because the aloneness was there as a protective device. And so that's the irony, and also the circular nature of the prison. In other words.